Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
And thank you for tuning in. This is Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. I'm your host, DR. With me is, from the California area, the Bay Area, I think, Joel Selvin. We had him earlier with Hollywood Eden, and now we have Drums and Demons, The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon. So, Joel, yes, are you in the Bay Area, as they say?
Dead center San Francisco.
Good. And you've been there all your life?
Pretty much, I grew up, we use that phrase loosely, across the bay in Berkeley.
And Berkeley was the center of the free speech movement back in the early to mid-'60s and stuff like that.
So you're talking about my high school years, yeah, man.
That's right. And apparently, from what I understand, we both graduated high school at the same time, 1967.
Dennis, I didn't graduate.
Well, yeah, that's what you say.
I did leave school in 1967.
Okay, got it. So you were lucky enough, if I can use that term, to maybe you didn't. Did you avoid the draft, quote unquote?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was called for the physical, and the psychiatrist kicked me out. He pretty much quickly figured out that I wouldn't make a good soldier.
Oh, well, not to get too personal about it, but we were on a river cruise recently and met a guy who's about our age from Texas. He joined up at 18 right out of high school because he wanted to, and he became a Army medic in Vietnam, so I can't imagine anything worse than that, but he seems to be doing good these days, so that's good on his part. So yeah, he's got
he got a GI Bill loan and VA medical care. It's it's not a bad deal.
No, and if you survive, he became got a degree, a master's degree in engineering, I think, but that's beside the point. We're talking with Joel Selvin, new book coming out. When this airs, it will be available. It's called Drums and Demons, The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon. So, Joel, you've had lots of books under your belt, and then this one comes along. What attracted you mainly to the Jim Gordon story?
Well, to be truthful, of course, the story had lingered with me since the crime. I didn't know any more about it than anybody else, but I certainly saw the drama and grief behind it. But at some point, a few years ago, an editor in New York publishing house that I've done a number of books with said that my next book should mix rock and roll and crime. And I went, that's the Jim Gordon story.
Uh-huh.
So that's sort of how that came about.
Let's backtrack a bit. Who is Jim Gordon, and what is this crime we're talking about?
Well, Jim Gordon was really one of the greatest drummers of his time, both as a Hollywood session musician and rampaging through the English rock scene at its peak, playing on George Harrison's solo album, founding member of Derek and the Dominoes, and then back to Hollywood to be a session player on big hit records by Carly Simon, Steely Dan, Johnny Rivers, et cetera, et cetera. And his brilliance was just recognized by anybody who saw him play. What they didn't understand was that Jim was severely mentally ill. He was schizophrenic, and extremely so. And schizophrenia, Dennis, turns out to be incredibly common. 1 in 100 in the general population suffer from it. About half of the schizophrenics can't be treated at all. The other half is kind of a sliding scale from, people that lead peaceful, quiet lives, like working in bakeries at night, to the borderline where they're taking psychiatric medicine and struggling every day to keep everything between the gutters. So it's a really pernicious condition. And in Jim's case, he kept it so under wraps that even all the psychiatrists he saw, and he saw many psychiatrists and was in residential treatment many times, but he was not diagnosed with schizophrenia until after the incident that put him in jail, which is when he killed his mother rather brutally. Mother was one of the imaginary voices in his head, which he couldn't distinguish in his condition from reality. And after years and years and years of being tortured and tormented by these voices in his head, driving him away from everything he loved, from people, from his daughter, from his work, from his music, it finally exploded, and he killed his mother with a hammer and a knife brutally, and was arrested a few hours later and spent the rest of his life in jail. He died last March at age 77, and, I don't think he ever wanted out of prison.
It was probably, without trying to sound like I know what I'm talking about, maybe for him it was a safe place.
I think so. I think it was comfortable. I think that he never recovered from his illness and just lived the rest of his life heavily medicated in a 9x12 cell.
So, as a drummer, though, what made him better than the rest? Is it, there's lots of drummers. Ringo Starr comes to mind. Ginger Baker. What made this guy different?
Ringo is one of the people that would tell you that Jim Gordon's the greatest drummer he ever saw. So, a drummer, is in charge of tempo and backbeat. Generally speaking, that's as far as they go. In Jim's case, he had a conceptual command of the drum kit that just was beyond other people's. And he could take the drum and turn it into a much more musical instrument and then embed his drums in the composition that he was recording. He spent years and years and years in Hollywood doing 3 sessions a day, 6 sessions a week, or 6 days a week, 3 to 5 songs per session. So, after several years of that, he had an incredibly defined and developed skill at recording drum parts. And when he went out on the road with Delaney and Bonnie, Mad Dogs and Englishmen, Derek and the Dominoes, Traffic, he developed the live drum sound because, in a studio, you're recording under a microscope. When you're on stage, you're blasting it to the grandstand. So it's 2 different styles, and Jim mastered them both. He made other drummers' jaws drop. Jim Keltner looks upon the day he met Jim Gordon as kind of a pivot point in his career. He went to the studio expecting to do a recording session with the group he was in, and when he got there, there was another blue sparkle tone Ludwig drum kit already set up. And he pulled up a piece of floor and watched Jim Gordon play, and it changed his life. He went out the next day and bought a blue sparkle tone Ludwig kit. But what Jim told me was that he had to learn to play like Jim in order to not play like Jim. Oh. And that he had that effect on all the drummers who heard him. His intuition was just so great that he could divide time in ways that other people couldn't even think of it. And I am sure that those abilities came from the same electrochemical setup in his brain that fostered his illness.
When you're talking about this, I'm reminded of that movie, A Beautiful Mind, about the mathematician, and it was I thought the movie
John Nash.
I thought the movie was brilliant because I didn't know what was going on until right at the end. I thought this was actually happening, but that's what John Nash saw in his mind, right? These government guys are after him, and stuff is going on, and then at the same time he's solving these brilliant mathematical problems.
I think that's a very parallel. It's the movie's a little soft and sweet. I think Jim's life, especially like the last 5, 6, 7 years before the crime, was a kind of like Hieronymus Bosch nightmare. and it wasn't pretty or funny or fuzzy or whimsical at all. I think he lived in torment, torture, and fear, and the incredible shame of not being able to control himself, which caused him to suppress all these symptoms and to not admit to them and to try and hide. I mean, it was years before he told a psychiatrist that he was seeing any one of them, that he was hearing voices.
And these
they all thought he was depressive.
Right, and nobody can really understand, I guess, unless you're actually in that situation. And thankfully, I'm not, that I know of. So, how would you compare Jim Gordon, the drummer, the musician? Let's to a common metaphor, to sports. Is there sports people that have the same kind of intuitive, instinctive master of their game that other players just don't come near?
Well, I'm sure that sports analogies would be available if I had any knowledge of that, but I'll give you a perfect parallel out of the music world, okay? Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys.
Gotcha. So,
he's fully schizophrenic and a fountain of creative ideas, as well as a fountain of doubt and insecurity. And if Brian hadn't been wealthy, he would have been institutionalized.
So, yeah, I got it. It's the brilliance on one end and the tragedy at the other end, all wrapped up in one person. It's like a living Shakespearean plays. The book is Drums and Demons by Joel Selvin, The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon. So a topic like this, how do you research it? I'm opening up the book right at the start, and you've got a scene from a little bar somewhere in Santa Monica, California, with a group playing that plays Monday nights. How did you find out that kind of stuff?
Well, the bass player in that band, the Blue Monkeys, is somebody I knew because he later joined the Chris Isaak band, and so many years ago, Rolly told me that he had been in a band with Jim Gordon when Jim was arrested, and I didn't know about that, but I just sort of filed that fact away. Then when it came time to work on the book, I mean, Rolly was one of the first people I called, and he was in touch with the other members of the Blue Monkeys. I talked to those guys. It's a terrific opening scene, if I say so myself.
It is. It's brilliant.
It's just a bar band in Santa Monica, and here's this $1 million drummer sitting there. What's he doing there, right? You know?
Mm-hmm.
$30 a night. I was real lucky, though, Dennis. I found... I knew of some people who had worked with Jim on an authorized biography. They were not professional journalists, but they got Jim's approval, and back like in 1988, 89. And they had a number of interviews with Jim in prison. They had access to his private records, his medical records, his diaries. They didn't really know what they were on to. Like the diaries, one of them said that, they weren't very useful. It's just his studio dates. Oh, no, that wouldn't be useful at all.
Not at all.
But the pile of interview transcripts and some of their notes was just invaluable, and it was something that nobody else was going to be able to duplicate.
So to fledgling nonfiction writers out there, what kind of steps do you go through putting together a book like this, or any of your books?
Well, the publishers want to see a book proposal, which is a 10,000-15,000 word sort of treatise on what this book would be like. And they don't want to read a whole book. There's too many people that are trying to get book deals. So they want to look at a little sort of digest of it. In order to write a proposal, you could write a proposal in 5 minutes, or in the case of Jim Gordon, you can spend several months doing the research just for the proposal. It was really a very difficult proposal to write. And in fact, it was a very difficult book to sell because of the matricide thing. I had a number of publishers express serious interest and then go into a big debate about whether to buy the book or not. and land on the side of not, because this guy killed his mother.
Right.
Now, interestingly, when Jim died last March, everything changed. He'd been a complete pariah. The entire world had turned their back on him, averted their eyes, and didn't want anything to do with some guy that had killed his mother so brutally. But when he died, in an instant, he became something else. He became a victim of mental illness, not a heinous killer. And for once, finally, there was some shred of compassion being extended to Jim, who in his lifetime received little to none.
Now, looking back on his life, it sounds, or from what I'm reading into the reading, nothing was manifested for a long, long time. How did he keep the problem secret? Because he's making, as you noted in one section, like $2,000 a week in the late 60s, which is a fortune today. So, and he's from one gig to another, and everything seems happy. He has a baby, things are fine. Was there a tipping point, or did he just keep it to himself until he fell apart?
Incredible will, right? To retain, to keep all those roiling feelings and thoughts inside yourself and hidden from even the closest people in your life. There were fissures that out of which eruptions came. The first one that everybody noticed was him knocking his girlfriend, Rita Coolidge, unconscious in a hotel hallway when he stepped out to talk to her, and she expected him to ask her to marry him. But he just clobbered her, and nobody understood it, including Jim. Really, this was just some inexplicable eruption. And that happened with other women. Relationships are very, very difficult for schizophrenics. They lack a lot of the bonding equipment and empathy and that kind of stuff that is so essential in getting along with other people. That didn't stop Jim from aspiring to relationships, but in the long run, they were all troubled, they were all difficult, and there were all these little fissures and eruptions of violence.
So what do you think we, as a general public, can learn from this story, besides lots of interesting musical tidbits from back in the 60s and 70s?
You know, Dennis, most of my books are, like you say, lots of interesting tidbits from music back in the 60s. This book actually has an important message for the reading public. We, as a culture, turn our backs on mental illness and pretend the best we can that it doesn't exist. We deal with it as minimally as possible, especially the hundreds of thousands of schizophrenics that are like living out on the streets in this country, right? Yep. I mean, they get the worst cause minimal medical care, and then they're turned right back out on the streets. So I want people to understand what it's like to suffer, and I want you to see how it can take down the most brilliant, incandescent, luminous lives like Jim's and just destroy it, just grind it up into pulp and scatter it to the winds. I mean, there's a point in Jim's life where he was so controlled by the voices that he couldn't play music anymore. And he didn't quite know that. And he took a job with Paul Anka, and he went to Las Vegas to play a 2-week engagement with Paul Anka and set up his drums for the rehearsal, hit the drums once, and the voices told him if he hit it again, he'd die. And he looked at the music director and said, I can't do this. I have psychological problems.
Yep.
And that was pretty much the end of Jim's professional career right there. I mean, he did get back into playing a little, but, you know, Santa Monica, Monday night, not exactly like the big time.
Right.
Wasn't certainly a Vegas showroom. So that's how tortured this guy was. And it's mapped out in quite considerable detail in the book, just how horrible and nightmarish his life was. And I think it's important for us all to understand just how powerful and painful and destructive mental illness can be.
And I think that's a point that has to be emphasized, I think, because who knows how many of us are walking around with problems that aren't quite as severe as Jim Gordon's, but still can hinder our personal lives, our work lives, our day-to-day existence. And so, yeah, people have to understand that all, things aren't visible.
There's a quote from Frank Zappa in the book that I think is just crucial. He says that he doesn't condone anybody killing anybody, but if this has to do with chemicals in your brain, then it's something that could happen to anyone.
It could. Something that could happen to anyone. As you note in the book, drums keep pounding rhythm to the brain. So, wow. So again, the lesson we can take from this book is you can't judge a book by its cover, I guess, to put it simply, because nobody knows what's going on with people.
Yes, well, people did not understand what was happening with Jim. I don't think Jim understood what was happening with Jim. And the whole thing was just such a terrible tragedy. And it wasn't just Jim in the blast zone, right? Because he had a daughter who was 14 years old when her grandmother was killed. He had an ex-wife who was very close to his mother. And a brother who was terrified for the rest of his life. I mean, he called for Jim to be executed. So nobody lives alone in this life. No man is an island and all that. And Jim's disease took down more than him and his mother.
And there's a ripple effect, like throwing like they say, a pebble into a pond, and then it ripples and ripples and ripples through everybody else that's associated with the person. It's like alcoholism or any other problem. You can't just be one person that's involved. It's the whole family, and now it's the family of man that's involved in all of this.
So true.
So true. What's next for you on a brighter note?
I just had some meetings this week with the songwriter Barry Mann down in Beverly Hills. Barry Mann and his late wife Cynthia Weil wrote about 100 hit songs.
Who put the bump in the bump, shabump the bump?
Oh yeah, and You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin'.
There's millions of them. I know, they're brilliant.
On Broadway and on and on and on.
Oh, it's...
And Barry's wife died last year after a prolonged illness, and he's starting to think about preserving his legacy. So we may have a book in the offing.
That'd be wonderful. And Joel, thank you very much for a return visit. I hope I made some sense of this terrific, tragic, yet interesting, to say the least, story. It's Drums and Demons, The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon. It's by Joel Selvin, and read it for the music tidbits, as we say, and also for the story behind it. So again, Joel, thank you very much for being with us.
Dennis, thanks a lot. I'll look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.